All righty, everybody. Welcome to the Gravity Shift podcast. We're here to do a fun debate today. We have Mr. Jordan Tryon over here and Alexander Wrinkle. They're going to be doing the debate of whether morality is objective or if it is relative. The definition that these two debaters have agreed on is the Oxford definition of a system of values, normative rules, or principles according to which intentions or behaviors are judged to be good or bad, right or wrong. Such judgment can arise from cultural, religious, or philosophical beliefs. And then now I'm going to let each one of the debaters introduce themselves, a little bit about them, and what position they will be taking. And then we're going to jump right into it with the affirmative, which will be Wrinkle. Anyways, go ahead, guys.
I go first?
You guys can you can address yourselves as you like.
Oh, okay. Just want to make sure. I'm Wrinkle. Currently, I am. What? Oh, okay. I'm Wrinkle. Currently, I am a college student studying history. I've had quite the adventurous life from my 20s of doing things from academia to random small-time jobs to military work, and I'm here to take the affirmative that for the question, is morality objective? I say yes, it is objective and not relative.
Okay, go, Jordan. Introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Jordan Tryon. I'm 33 years old. I love long walks on the beach, and I've read way too many books as a kid and a teenager. And once I got over my angsty years, kind of settled down and got into philosophy. It hasn't changed too much. Hasn't brought me a college professorship position or boundless wealth in the form of book publications. But that's a different story. No, I just love to argue, and I'll argue with anyone about anything, taking any side, and I'll be taking the moral relativist position.
Perfect. All right. And with that, we're going to be doing, I'm going to explain the system of which we're doing. So we're going to have opening arguments, which it looks like. Now, guys, yeah, looks like the opening arguments can be up to 20 minutes is what we agreed. The break, do I have an old one?
No, I think we agreed it was 20 minutes total for the opening and 10 and 10 each.
Oh, okay,
Because
okay.
if you look at all the sections,
Yeah.
it's supposed to be half
Right,
mine
right.
and
I'm
half
sorry.
his.
Yeah, thank
So
you. I know. I read it and I was like, I don't know. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we're going to be doing 10 minutes each for opening arguments. Do you guys want to take a 2-minute break after that, or do you want to just jump right into it? Because there's apparently a 2-minute break. Do you guys have your cards out?
Yeah, I have my card. Yeah, it says opening arguments, 20 minutes, so 10 minutes each, and then a small break for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable. It will
Okay.
allow us
That's
to
fine.
take notes and think when it comes
Sure.
to
Okay.
rebuttal section.
Yep. All
and
right.
then a break after that. Yeah.
Cool. And then, anyways, and then after that, we'll have rebuttals part 1. Each opponent will have 6 minutes, and then part 2, each opponent will have 3 minutes. After that, we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll jump into cross examination, which will be allotted 10 minutes to each person. And then we'll have an open exchange for 8 minutes, and then we'll run into closing statements. And then at the end, we're going to do a Q&A, so you guys can ask either of these guys any questions, and they give you an answer. We'll be allotted 15 minutes for that, and all you have to do is follow the social medias. And we have our wonderful friend Raven, who's going to be in the chat, who's going to be hanging out with you guys and helping out and checking and talking and whatnot. So, but with that, yeah, we'll jump right into it. And then let me get my handy dandy clock out. And Wrinkle, you have 10 minutes as of now.
All right. Thank you. All right. Is morality objective? I will start with a Shakespeare quote. Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. These words are that of William Shakespeare, which he gave for Hamlet to say. Hamlet, in Act 2, Scene 2, the context of this is a conversation he has with two others. Hamlet is trying, at this time, to feign insanity. He wishes to convince the other people that he has lost his mind, that he has gone crazy. And what was once a statement, which many would have believed to be only that of the mentally insane, back in Shakespeare's day, has become commonplace. to believe in today's world. And many people even think that to take a stance that morality is subjective, well, this is probably, as some might say, a higher and more intellectual position than to say morality is objective. Nevertheless, civilization finds itself here at this debate. Is morality objective? This side of the debate shall argue in favor of the affirmative, that morality is objective, and it is not only confined to the mind, but it is also something which is real. The moderator started by giving moralities, objectives, and subjectives definitions. But to add further clarification to these definitions, this side presents these example sentences so that the opposing side and listeners can better grasp these concepts. So subjective statements are statements such as these. The English alphabet's best letter is the letter J. The greatest animal ever is the dog. Objective statements are ones such as these. More often than not, fish are better at swimming than cats. 4 plus 2 results in 6. Even if statements which are incorrect can still be objective, that is to say that they can be measured against some standards and one can say that these are right or wrong. For instance, statements like Mercury is the 5th planet from the sun, or George Washington never existed. These are objective statements. Even though they are wrong, they still have meaning outside of the human mind. And whether they themselves are true, again, doesn't matter. And it is this side's goal of the debate to show that statements like molesting a child is wrong is a real and true statement just as much as saying the earth is round, rather than someone being able to dismiss it simply by saying, well, that's just your opinion. So before going further, this side will also assert an extra axiom. And the extra axiom is this, that no religion needs to be true. And this is not to say that every religion's every claim is false, but more so, the focus is that the claims themselves related to the divine of these religions, they need not be true. This side will also wish to remind the audience that the goal here is not necessarily to prove or to provide evidence arguing for a specific or an entire view, a moral view, doctrine, scheme, or whatever, but it is more so to argue that morality, that is to say good and evil, exist, and this is a standard which one can apply to human actions. Empirical evidence in the form of real-world and present examples or historical examples may aid to any proposition of this side, but in this side will argue more so on the argument relying on a priori. An a priori, for those who do not know, means something that is true which one can obtain simply through intellectual comprehension. An example is the existence of truth. The existence of truth is something which one can prove a priori. Take this statement. Truth exists, or excuse me, truth does not exist. But if truth does not exist, then truth does not exist would have to be true. This results in a logical absurdity. And thus, of course, it becomes self-evident, a priori, reasoning to the mind that, of course, truth must exist. Now, to return to the prime thesis and to the reasoning behind it. The prime thesis being that morality is objective. As what this side said earlier about truth is that truth is real, but at the same time, truth is not something which the human eyes, hands, or ears can perceive. It's some sort of thing which exists that the human senses cannot touch. Only the mind can comprehend it, but at the same time, it can still exist independently of the mind. Within this mortal coil, within this physical realm, people can agree that things like the laws of physics exist, that there are various principles of gravity, of chemistry, and the like. Morality functions very similar to this. One may, of course, disagree that gravity is real, as unfortunately some people do. But of course, we would all know that gravity will still function regardless of people's beliefs surrounding it. The same thing with the human past and many other topics. Human being interactions can be organized the same way. Within this world, we see that certain things fall into a certain order, and that if something deviates from that, bad things happen. And that is exactly what morality is. Human behavior can be classified as either ordered or disordered. And much like gravity, again, one can still deny these things. But again, if one does deny and decide to go on these various bad paths, well, things will not go well. And again, these are not necessarily things of human thought. If one were to try to base his or her marriage on deception, well, anyone can honestly predict that that marriage is not going to last long. The same thing with civilization as a whole. Human beings are not solitary entities. Human beings survive within groups. And group cohesion, well, that is something that is ordered, which we can call good. And anything that orients human behavior to destructiveness, that terminates in itself, well, that we can classify as bad. In fact, nature itself, natural order, even argues against those who believe in moral relativism. And again, we're on various platforms that auto-censor, so again, I will be careful and creative in my choice of words. I personally don't like saying these things, but again, self-censorship to get around the AI algorithms. Thank you. Even the Huffington Post recently put out an article that atheism has a self-life termination problem, as in those who believe in a world that is, well, of course, not all atheists, but many do so, believe in moral relativism and that there really is no truth in life. Well, these people do have higher self-life termination rates than those who believe that believe in, well, moral objectivity and that there is truth out there. Similarly, not only in self-life termination, the Washington Post also cites examples of how people's religious views, their overall mindset, it determines on how much these people reproduce. So not only are these moral relativists committing higher rates of self-life termination, but they also don't even reproduce as much. Such a society that advocates for things as moral relativism is, well, these are doomed societies. Okay, made my point.
Okay, that was.
I know. I got a
8 minutes
minute
55.
left, but
Yeah.
I concede an extra minute.
Okay, no problem. And then, Jordan, when you're ready.
I am ready. I want you to imagine yourself traveling through time to an era of different social norms that people were just as confident in their validity as a universal truth as ever at any point in time. Where slavery, arranged marriages, a bunch of horrible stuff you could imagine. I think everybody's pretty familiar with human history and our policies towards that. And when we come back to the present, we can go over to other countries that are virtually diametrically opposed to our standards of liberal Western philosophy and see it as abhorrent in nature. But if you ask them, you ask their local academics, they'll defend them to the core. They see absolutely no moral dilemma with that. And I'm really glad Wrinkle brought up the idea of the fact that, yes, there are some truths. Truths can exist. Physics does not care about your opinion. And when we look at technological development through different societies, there's proof of that, where people have built monuments and technologies using mechanisms and systems. The language might be different doing the math, but the results are the same and they're perfectly translatable. Given that in mind, there has not been any consensus on morality. There has been no moral truth that has been generally accepted and derived universally. If our measure of truth is just biological function, we can go into that a little bit later. that has nothing to do. I mean, that has its own flaws in general. And what it really comes down to is not whether objectivism is a better practicing philosophy, whether you should live your life with that belief or not. That's irrelevant. We're here to discuss if that is the most valid claim that a universal morality, that an objective morality exists. And there's really two standards that have to be met to validate that claim. One, there has to be an objective code of ethics. There has to be an objective code of ethics that is as mutable as physics itself, which already has a tall order because there isn't a lot to support that. And number two, he's going to have to demonstrate that we even have the free will to make moral decisions in the first place. I don't know about you, that has been a topic that nobody has come to a conclusion or truth on ever in history. It's endlessly debated. And with those two criteria, that sets a standard where now you're left with a dilemma. Do you accept a claim that you cannot disprove, like moral objectivism, like an objective code of ethics? I can't prove it doesn't exist. You can't prove a flying spaghetti monster doesn't exist. But that's no basis to adopt that claim. It's not about how we feel about it. It's not about right or wrong. It's about whether or not this is true or less likely to be true than the alternative. And the alternative doesn't have those standards to meet. It's a simpler explanation. If you cannot prove that free will exists and that there's an objective code of ethics, then the alternative is that it's probably a naturalistic explanation. So if you're an individual that values the pursuit of basing your opinions and beliefs on what claims are more likely to be valid, then you have to base it on what has more factual evidence backing it and which one has the lower standard of proof required to justify the claim. And frankly, objective morality just does not stand up to that scrutiny. And honestly, I'll cede that 5 minutes. That's it.
Okay, that is good. So, yeah, we're going to give the guys a couple minutes to take some notes on both of each other's openings. During this time, I just say welcome again to the podcast. And if you're just tuning in, we have Wrinkle, or Alexander Wrinkle here, and Jordan Tryon. Wrinkle is taking the affirmative of that morality is objective. And then so Jordan Tryon is making the claim of its subjectivity or relativity. And but yeah, so while you guys are here, you can find us on on X, on Rumble, and Twitch is what we're all live on right now. But we're also on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok as well. It's our first showing, so. This will be the first thing that gets posted. But yeah, if you guys want to enter, there's going to be a Q&A at the end. All you have to do is you just have to follow on any of the social medias, and then yeah, just let us know that you want to be entered in, and we'll get you in. But okay, you guys how you guys doing? You need some more time? Good. Okay. So we're going to start with rebuttals part 1. And you guys can go ahead and get that started. And you have 6 minutes starting now.
All right. At least let me reset my own timer. That's okay. This can count. I don't think it'll take the whole 6 minutes anyway. So I find it fascinating that the opponent of mine talks about how one could take a step through in a portal of time. It's a very good tactic, by the way, to use stories because human beings, well, we just love stories. It's true that if one goes into different eras of time, as well as in many different civilizations, that there would be different standards that they would have as morality. But it is important to understand that some of the morality are the bigger ends, which we would call morality, but some tend to be smaller ends, which are more so manners. For instance, if someone were to burp at a dinner table within our modern context, that's not necessarily considered polite, while others might consider polite. But this is not necessarily the point which this side is trying to drive to prove. Again, as what was said before, this isn't to say we're arguing for a particular scheme of morals, just the fact that morals themselves exist. Even the opponent decided to give examples. People would claim to, if one were to go back in time, there would be people practicing slavery or various forms of marriage, which we would consider to be unjust as they are non consensual, and the like. The opponent himself decided to call these things horrible stuff. But of course, this can only ever be horrible if there is, again, some sort of moral standard, excuse me, some sort of objective standard which we can apply to these various behaviors, which is morality. And again, just because one might say, oh yeah, one might say that, well, there is no universal agreed upon moral truth of all human beings. And again, that is true. I am pretty sure that there is not a single point on which which every single person, regardless of place, time, age, culture, civilization, or whatever, would agree. I mean, many people may agree on a lot, but I'm pretty sure there is probably that one stickler out there who would decide to justify things in his own mind. But again, that's not what defines morality. As what this side said earlier, when it comes to morality, we deal with a priori truth, ordered versus disordered. And again, just because people disagree doesn't take away the truth to that. For instance, let's just say there is a debate, which actually, let's not pretend, because these are debates. People debating evolutionary biology, for example. Some people believe it is real, other people do not. Some people believe it is partially true when it comes to things, they'll try to differentiate between speciesization versus changes within a species. But again, everybody, hopefully everybody, at the end of the day, regardless of which side comes on, someone comes for the creation, evolution, or whatever other position one wants to take, everybody can at least agree that these things are either true or they are not. And one could go back in time to a point where people didn't believe in things like gravity and all these other things, etc., or that atoms even existed, or that the sun is technically it's a big ball of plasma, but sometimes people thought it was just a bunch of wood on fire, and some people even disagreed on how big it was, sometimes by a lot. But yeah, so the same thing is true with moral truth. Moral truth can be defined as what leads to order in a society, what societies can function with this versus what societies cannot. And while it is true that sometimes societies might be dysfunctional for a time, those societies will eventually get rid of bad behaviors on their own. Yeah. So there you go.
Okay.
I'm done.
All right. Let me pause that. Seated a couple minutes, and then let me get this reset. And you are good to go whenever, Jordan.
Great. So let's crack a couple points here. So once again, I think we're falling into the same trap of confusing practical philosophy with objective truth. Yes, it's true that things can be true or false, but we have to also have to act within the realm that we do not have complete knowledge on the matter. And when you're dealt with that, it changes absolutely nothing about the validity of the claim. As far as valuing objectivity, objective morality and the basis of ordered versus disordered societies, that sets up an absolutely terrible can of worms. And yes, real quick about that qualitative statement. Yeah, did I say, society is bad, which would be irrelevant if it is terrible? I think it's terrible because I choose to think it's terrible. I accept that it's terrible. I feel that it is terrible. And my moral philosophy is built around my experiences and my determinations. And I'm not going to say what basis those are, but that changes absolutely nothing about the relativistic argument. Whether or not it's objectively true has nothing to do with whether or not it's a good practicing philosophy. If it's a thing that results in less harm, if it's a world you want to live in. So, it's analogous to the gun is always loaded. It's generally better to treat a gun as if it is always loaded, even though it's not always loaded. And why do we do that? Because generally we tend to be better off that way. So on to the next thing, the ordered versus disordered society. it's interesting how you kind of touch on relativism there just a little bit. How many ordered society? I mean, the USSR was pretty ordered. There are a lot of societies we look at today that would be universally frowned upon that were incredibly ordered. Is the biological prerogative the basis of morality, the thriving of our species? I don't see where the universe has an opinion on that subject. And I don't see how that's not another human construct. And frankly, an arbitrary construct at that. Why does ordered and disordered have to be the determination of morality? Ordered societies tend to do better. Ants are ordered. Are they moral? Are they more moral actors? And once again, this has absolutely no tie-in to whether or not we have free will, that we are even capable of making moral choices in the first place. That's never been addressed. You can keep saying we have societies that are ordered and disordered, and that's the basis of good and evil. Once again, there are different societies with relative levels of success and disorder that have radically different practices. Some we'd consider by today's standards to be immoral or moral. There's no consensus still in that basis. There are multiple ways to order a society that cover a range of ethical principles that directly contradict one another. And onto that, you still haven't addressed, my opponent still hasn't addressed the two main important points about making that claim valid. It's not whether or not objective principles should be true. It's not about a standard of morality, that there's no metric of success that justifies that morality. Those claims still have to be verified to be objective. All the claims you've made about ordered versus disordered can still be represented in a relative philosophy, in a relative moral structure. And frankly, it still sounds arbitrary. Biological success is the metric of good and evil, has some horrific pitfalls when you factor in things that maybe we could generally consider wrong, but don't actually negatively impact the biological or community success of a society. And so if you want to address that, go ahead. But I want to see the claim of validity, not the claim of what should be. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay. Alrighty, and then now we're going to head into part 2 of the rebuttals. Each of the debaters are going to be allotted 3 minutes, and then, go ahead and start whenever you're ready, Wrinkle.
All right, thanks for that. Hold on. All right, so let's see here. To go back to my point, it's more so talking about when it comes to order versus disorder, it's mainly so talking about individual human behavior. It's not necessarily talking about how something might be organized. Order would refer to natural order, that is to say, the laws with the universe as everything seems to work. And again, morality is a very strange force. Much like gravity, not much is really known about it. But we can see it and its effects in the real world, I would say. But it is interesting that my opponent earlier talks about how these are some of these horrific pitfalls. And he also talks about how societies will function pretending, I believe, that various certain actions are bad and good when they're not actually bad or good, but that still yearns for someone to ask, why is it better, even if these things weren't real, why would it better to pretend that they were instead of pretending that they are not real? I mean, is it better that people pretend gravity's real? Is it better that people pretend math is real? These things obviously work. Of course, I argue Occam's razor. Well, he didn't actually say it, but for the record, William of Ockham did not say it. But that razor goes as this: the simplest solution tends to be the correct one. Or more accurately, things should not be argued to be much more complex than they actually are. Instead of thinking that it is better to pretend that society functions better on that these things are either good or bad, society just functions better and they're just fake, or maybe that these are actual real rules that society learns, grows, and develops, and comes to shows us functioning. versus declining. And when it comes to the free will argument, I would argue that free will doesn't necessarily have to exist or not exist, because order and disorder have to apply to human behavior in any given moment. Is this action, regardless if that person's will is really his own or we are just mere products of biological function, does this action lead to healthy propagation of a civilization, or does it lead to unhealthy propagation and a decline of civilization? And no civilization can last which has high self-termination rates or high rates of, low rates of birth, high rates of crime, high rates of theft, and the like. Obviously, these are real principles which we can apply to the real world. There, my 3 minutes is gone.
Okay. Whenever you're ready.
So I love the misrepresentation of Occam's razor here. Once again, kind of reinforcing my point about the lowest burden of proof, the simplest explanation requiring the least amount of evidence to support it. So it's interesting how, once again, you're saying the definition of order, you're saying it doesn't require free will to make a moral assessment. So by that definition, we can consider every living creature, or possibly not even a living creature, anything that doesn't even make a decision, we can hold to a moral standard. So we can judge ants now. We can judge the seagull that steals our sandwich on the beach, not because it's just in their nature, but because it was, by some standard, either something in compliance or in compliance with an objective value. I frankly think that's ridiculous. To have morality without autonomy renders the entire subject moot. It's interesting how you keep using these as representations of true principles when you're just stating facts. You keep comparing morality to being as true as mathematics, and yet we have not derived those claims. We've not built on those claims. There have not been facts to support morality. Nothing's been built off of it, except more philosophy and writing and laws, let's say. And the whole point of moral relativism about, okay, well, why should I have opinions if I'm a moral relativist? There's nothing intrinsically wrong or objectively wrong with having a practicing philosophy. A practicing philosophy does not mean that something has to be objectively true. I like how you've completely disregarded the loaded gun analogy in that rebuttal. If you view a universe, if your beliefs are based on opinion where generally harm is bad, generally we want to live in a fairer, freer society, egalitarian under justice, aka the Western liberal philosophy, there's nothing there's nothing wrong with that. You will have a more ordered society, but that still has nothing to do with whether or not there's an objective code of ethics that rules the universe. Once again, you've completely ignored the criticisms of that. You're just attacking relativism, but you've done nothing to actually demonstrate that objective morality exists, that there's an objective code of ethics. You've stated some patterns. Oh, yeah, there are orders in society and biological success, yada, yada, yada. That still does not prove it true. Thank you.
All right. And then so right now we're going to take a 5-minute break for everybody. That way that, hey, little potty breaks, or if you're going to take some notes or anything. So you guys just hang around, hang tight, and then we'll be back here in 5 minutes. And then, go ahead. And if you have any questions that you'd like to ask for the Q&A, we have our handy dandy Raven in the chat that's going to be checking in on that and giving me a list once everything's done. So, all right, guys. Thanks. We'll see you guys in about 5 minutes. Alrighty, and now we are back. And we're going to jump right into it. We're going to be jumping into cross-examination. Each has 10 minutes. And go ahead and take it away whenever you're ready. Oh, you guys are muted? You
Oh,
unmute
yeah, there we
yourselves?
go.
All right.
I was about to say that. I thought you were going to also talk about the rules for cross-exam prior to getting to this.
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys, I think you guys agreed previously that you wanted 10 minutes uninterrupted, and then we were going to have an open exchange where you guys could go back and forth. How do you guys want to do it?
I could have sworn for the cross-exam, it's where one person directs the conversation.
Right, well, that's what I thought. I thought you wanted
okay.
it.
I just want you, because you said, well, one person gets to, okay.
Right.
Just wanted to make sure we got it.
Yeah. Okay, yep.
Okay.
Back and forth
Ready?
is completely fine. Yep, go ahead.
Ready?
All right.
Just want to make sure. Okay. So I will start cross-exam section part 1. Well, actually, not really part 1. It's just the part, and it's my part. So let's see here. I got 10 minutes? Yep.
Yes, you have 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. Let's go. Okay, so there was a point when you say, I say it's bad, and I feel it, I accept it, etc., when it comes to bad actions. Do you want to elaborate on that exactly?
Sure. So first, it's important to differentiate what is a metaphorical truth from an objective truth. I say it's bad. Now, my personal philosophy, and this is not the philosophy of total relativism, the way I base, and this is just my personal aspect, is essentially based on feeling. I think all morality is based on feeling. I determine what is right or wrong based on a set of values that I have accepted, that I may have been environmentally exposed to, whether it's a combination of my upbringing, the culture, to some extent, maybe biological factors. It's a incredibly incomprehensible, nuanced web of influences that shape who we are. And on that basis, you can have you can possess a philosophy, a moral philosophy, in which you choose to act on a code of ethics based on things like justice, universal justice, reason. Reasoning can differ, but universal ethic, an idea of universal justice, egalitarianism in the form of justice, does not have to be objective to be something you choose to adopt as a practicing philosophy.
Okay. So we both will agree that somebody's opinion on Darth Vader is purely subjective. I think everybody agrees with that, right? If I say Darth Vader is the best movie villain of all time, we know that is a subjective statement. There's no truth to that, right?
Well, the only truth is that it's in the opinion of someone.
Yes, that we can say that it is true that, yes, it is true that is that person's opinion, but we can also say it is only an opinion. So when it comes to, like, for example, Saddam Hussein gassing civilians, if somebody says that's bad, that's wrong, could we just say that that's just that person's opinion? Or is it actually bad? Is it actually wrong?
We can say it's that person's opinion.
So if someone were to molest a child, is that wrong? Is that really objectively wrong, or is it just that person's opinion?
I would say the universe does not have moral opinions. There's no objective code.
Is it wrong, though?
Is it wrong? In my opinion, absolutely, and we should do everything to stop that. And generally, it does lead to a more productive, egalitarian, and fair world to have that practicing philosophy.
Why is that productive? Why is that a thing that we want to have?
Because we feel that it's right, because we feel like that's the right thing to do ultimately, because we have grown and we've known from experience that we tend to thrive and want to be fair to one another. Still no argument for the proof that it exists externally of human experience or perception. It's evidence that the cultural consensus, our upbringing, and what shapes us as individuals informs that belief.
So somebody can only say when it comes to something as the examples, and we could go of course on and on with
Mhm.
the various lists. Somebody specifically making let's just say chemical weapons or
Mhm.
nuclear weapons, bombing civilian populaces in war, committing other war crimes, for instance, such as, and I'll use a Middle English pronunciation to get around censors, Rapa. These are just only within somebody's realm of opinion that these aren't somehow inherently destructive choices that people can make.
I think you're conflating wrongness with destructiveness. Uh,
I
you
think
can
that's
add,
my overall thesis
yeah,
is that if something is destructive, if
it is
something is
inherently
not,
wrong. Yeah.
yes, that is our
Okay.
definition of morality. If it's disordered, destructive, that leads to
Well, I
um,
agree with you that we define morality that destruction is generally wrong. In most societies and cultures, they can agree that being destructive is morally wrong. It does not that does not correlate with an objective reality that destruction is wrong. Destruction happens all over the natural world. Is it immoral when a hurricane destroys a city?
I I think you're confusing nature versus natural order. Things can occur in nature but
Hmm.
still be contrary to natural order. The reason why hurricanes happen is because of, well, I'm not a meteorologist, I'm not an expert, but it has a lot to do with the Earth's rotation, sea temperatures, sun, and all that other junk. And again, I'm not a meteorologist, so I can't give a good explanation of it. I mean, I, for one, will argue that human beings do have free will. I was actually curious to see your reaction to the statement if human beings have free will or not. Because to me, it's obvious that human beings have free will because the body obeys the will. I'm raising my hand right now. I'm flipping it around because my will orders my hand to do so. Of course, I may have involuntary reactions, like the doctor takes his little hammer, boop, hits me on my knee, and my knee will go up and down. But again, that's just a biological reaction that I have. But ultimately, when it comes to the choices that I make in my day-to-day life, I would argue that it's because my will says so. And as far as the loaded gun analogy, do you want to like elaborate the loaded gun analogy that you did? Because after all, you said I didn't respond to it, so I want to you to explain it so I can fully respond.
It's just an analogy for practical philosophy and its value compared to truth. So
Okay.
just because something is true or false does not mean that that determines what is the best practicing philosophy.
Why would that not be the case?
Because if the gun's not loaded, because the whole point is the gun is not always loaded, but you should treat it if it's always loaded
Hmm. Because it's beneficial.
because it's
Even if it's not
beneficial.
loaded, because something bad could happen when it comes to
Well,
the gun misfiring, right?
because it's a preferable outcome for the person or
Yeah,
the
it is
individual.
preferable. Why would it
Yeah.
be preferable?
Well, it's preferable to those who prefer that action. If you have someone for who does not give a crap about whether or not the gun is loaded, well, that's another subject. But
Hmm.
generally, we can consider as a practice, as a common philosophy that we usually share, but not universally, that it's a good practicing philosophy to have.
So if
Good
someone
on our
were
metrics.
Sure. If someone were to say, well, I don't really believe in gravity, but I'll just pretend gravity exists because I'll just pretend like the loaded gun analogy, because it's just better that I pretend it exists.
The
It's just,
difference is the difference is gravity is always there.
oh, I would argue so is morality. I mean,
Right.
I wouldn't recommend anybody in the audience do things like perpetually commit fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Even if there were no laws that existed by governments, human beings cannot function in any sort of cohesive group with each other if they endorse things like theft, murder,
Mm,
adultery.
I mean,
No,
actually, theft and murder were pretty commonplace in the Mongol Empire. They were pretty
yeah.
stable for a time. So,
Are they still around?
name one cohesive society that stayed the same for over 300 years.
Let's see here. Well, you do have the Vatican. That stayed around for quite a few hundred years and it's still functioning.
I'd hardly call them the same thing.
I would call them the same thing. It's the oldest continuing existing absolute monarchy in the world. But hey,
Hmm.
but yeah.
Okay.
But again, I would say that societies do change and develop, just much like a child. An individual child is much similar to humanity as a whole. We learn, we grow and develop, and we discover new things. Those ideas that are good float to the top. Those ideas that are bad float or sink to the bottom, excuse me. And I'll argue the same thing is true with morality. The good ideas will perpetuate and they'll exist. It'll take a while, much like with
Hmm.
evolutionary biology. These are processes that take a while. And us, in our own little mortal coil, we'd only get a tiny sliver of the greater existence of humanity. But I think my
Oh,
time's almost up, right?
yeah.
You have
Well, I don't.
35 seconds.
Oh, 35
Yeah.
seconds. Let's see, I'm trying to think if I could add anything
Yeah.
else.
So, what's your question?
No, that's just it. That was
Oh,
my
okay.
cross-examination, I guess. Oh yeah,
Okay.
your turn.
All right.
Great.
1 second. All right, go ahead.
All right. What defines natural order then?
I would say natural order is what the rules of the universe, whether one wants to believe they some sentient lawgiver gave them or not. But those are the rules of the universe. For
Okay.
instance, and again, I'll give the example: murder is bad, molesting people is wrong, etc. But it also would include things like the laws of physics as well. You know, things that are again, these are mysterious forces. We don't really know exactly what's behind them, but we can observe these effects and measure them, even if we don't necessarily have 100% perfect knowledge of their sources.
Right. And so, what is your determining belief then of hard evidence, hard measurements that morality is a part of the natural order?
I would go back to what I said earlier that if a human society believes in certain things, and again, this isn't to argue a complete specific moral scheme or anything, this is just to say the overall idea that these things exist. If societies adopt certain principles, they just don't really do well. They need to agree on some basic principles before going forward. I will agree that I believe that there's more to it than that. For instance, when it comes to questions about the death penalty, um, or proper prosecution of fraud, or dealing with things like the questions of like our corporations, people, etc., what to do in this specific war. Those are the more nuanced, harder discussions and questions that can come later. But the fact that one can even debate them, I argue, is already based on the presupposition that these do have objective answers. Because nobody sits there and well, some people would, but I would argue it's just for entertainment, only entertainment, not out of any truth, to have a podcast debating if Voldemort is better than
Yeah.
I don't know, coin from the Hunger Games in terms of cinematic value or something.
So, you keep pointing to natural order as the metric for good and evil, the basis of morality. Why is order itself justification for an objective morality?
I would say
And
order.
beyond the evidence of physics. Physics doesn't have opinions,
Mhm.
right?
I would
Where
say
does morality play in?
I would say any non-sentient entity cannot have an opinion, period. If we want to classify the definition of opinion coming from the Latin word to think.
Well, you did say that free will is irrelevant to morality.
I was testing you, I will have to be honest. But I would argue that even if free will was irrelevant, one could still classify different actions as good or evil. But then again, if there was no free will, then we could classify different people as good or evil. But of course, I believe in free will. So
Uh,
I would say that it really goes
right.
back to actions.
All right. So we'll cut through that a little bit, and maybe we'll have a debate on that subject later.
I agree that free
Yeah,
will is a
yeah.
whole.
But
Let's
it
not
does.
touch that.
It's a can of worms that is required as a prerequisite, at least in my idea of objective morality, and that's why you state that free will is self-evident based on the fact that you could will your hand to move.
Yes, the will is superior to the body. The body obeys the will.
Can you think of any preceding action that has led you to here and now and the desire to move your hand?
I just want to show you.
Okay, why do you want to show me?
Well, I want to show you that free will exists, so I provide evidence for that
Right.
because we're talking about this.
And you don't see, are you not aware that there is a chain of events all the way from your birth and before that, a preceding cause to every action that follows?
I think you're confusing what happens versus why it happens. You want me to elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure.
So we can always say that things happen and people do things, but it's more so the why people do things. And again, I will argue the reason why people do things is because those people make a conscious choice of the mind, it asked the will, to do these things. I could easily just get up and end the debate right here and let you and Brian enjoy your time, but I choose not to do that. I choose to stay here. I also chose to do this debate. I could also not do it, but I want to do it. I want to help my friend with his podcast, and I also want to put these beliefs out there. I choose to do that.
You choose to do that.
Yes, by my own free will. By my own will. I choose to do
And
that.
can you think of anything before today that's influenced that choice?
Us talking? I'm
Yeah.
not too sure exactly what you're saying by that.
That's a good one. What I'm trying to go into is how can you rule out any preceding factors in the choices you make? Any preceding influences, and you chose to get up and attend this,
Yeah.
right? Something influenced you to do that before. Something influenced you to be interested in the subject. Something influenced you all the way back to when you were born to make you who you are today, to have the desires you want now. The problem with the free will debate is that it's not self-evident at all.
Well, I would
Because
say
there's
it's-
always a chain of cause and effect that leads to the present. So it's up in the air.
I wouldn't necessarily. Again, it's talking about what versus why. The reason why human beings act, even if put in a situation, they will always have a choice to act or not act when it comes to any action.
And how do you know?
I know this because the thief has the option, even if he's put in a position where it may benefit himself to steal, he still has the choice not to steal. The murderer, even though he's put in a position, maybe by others, to commit murder, still has the choice not to commit murder. Yeah, I just think it's obvious from there.
And yet, at the same time, there were a set of circumstances that shaped those people to that point to make that decision. That's why it's an endless debate in the subject of free will. It's not, it cannot, by definition, it cannot, by the fact that we live in a continuum of time, by definition, cannot be a totally closed and shut case on free will. There are always preceding influences. We have neurons, they fire electrical signals. There's even a study that was showing that neurons will pre-charge before decisions are made. Before decisions are made. Before consciousness is aware of making decisions, there are neurons that will charge in that region of the brain before they're even aware of making it. And and if anyone's curious, I can dig that up for you today. Just let the host know, and I can find that paper for you. It's a neurological study where they did EKGs. But anyway,
Perhaps the mind is deeper than the brain.
maybe, but make a subconscious choice for me. Will it?
But if I made a subconscious choice, something below my consciousness, define that exactly.
Define a subconscious choice. It's a decision you made before you were even aware of it, consciously aware of it.
Obviously, my heart's beating right now, and I'm not
Yeah.
in control of my heart. But again, I think you confuse human capability, just human ability in general, versus free will. I mean, I don't have the ability to teleport myself to the moon. And if someone says, hey, you really think you have free will? Well, then teleport yourself to the moon. Well, I can't do that. That's not any evidence or against free will. It's just outside of my power.
So you're saying the subconscious is outside of your power?
Maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not a neurologist.
Yeah.
But I do know
fair
that
enough.
when I make actions, it is because I ultimately choose them.
And you know that
Same with anybody else.
empirically, not subjectively through your physical experience. You know that for a fact.
Yes. I know that when I commit an action, I have, well, at least before I commit an action, I have the choice to act or not act. And I have a choice between all sorts of actions. And I know, as much as I know 2 + 2 is 4, that, well, this is me and my choices. This is I. This is my choice. This choice is mine. Right now, continuing to talk, just saying random stuff right now. I'm choosing to do this.
So when we're going to order and disorder, how do you reconcile an objective philosophy? What I actually am curious, what is your personal philosophy towards what is good and evil? I know you cite ordered versus disordered societies.
Well, I cite,
but I think we've understood that there are
actions.
multiple. You're citing actions.
Yeah,
but we
also,
also,
not necessarily how it's structured. Obviously, any
Right.
government can be structured. A government that says that half the population will die, and random children will be taken out and thrown into the lake. I mean, that is obviously organized. If the government issues it and people do it and they have a specific scheme, but it's more so in compliance with natural order to
Right.
just to clarify definitions. And it's not necessarily organization as a whole, but how it functions. Does it function where it is productive or destructive?
Okay, and I just want to say real quick, the time for the examination is over. We just go into open exchange for right now. So,
Sure.
yeah, you guys are.
I always thought this part was a little fuzzy.
I felt like we kind of did open exchange.
Yeah,
I
this
know,
is
I
basically
know,
it. That's the process.
I know. Well, I just figured
You
like
want to
it's
join
just-
us?
Well, I'm just figured. No, I'm the moderator. No, I just figured I'm just gonna allot it to the cross examination. You guys are riffing, so I didn't want to mess that up too much.
Okay.
So you guys got another.
I was going to say, or we could just do the Q&A. I mean, I think we've kind of exhausted.
let's
I've
just do
pretty much
that.
exhausted
Yeah.
all of my points.
Okay.
I think Mr. Jordan can also.
Well, you guys also have closing
Yeah.
statements to do as well.
That is true. Why don't we do like a Q&A and then we could do closing statements? I actually.
I don't know. Let's do the.
Let's just do Q&A, man.
Oh yeah, let's just do it. Let's just do it.
You guys
Go,
don't
go,
want-
We're
go.
just gonna rehash the intro.
Yeah, exactly. I'll just.
Okay, that's fine. All right, guys. Well, if you have any questions for these two, go ahead and put it in the chat, and then we'll send it. Or I'll let the guys know what those questions are, and you'll get some answers. So, how'd you guys think it went?
You're talking to us.
Yeah,
now,
you
right?
guys
Not the
now.
chat.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Now
yeah.
you're like, hey, chat. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it went pretty well.
I liked it.
Cool. Feel like anything changed in each other's minds?
But I don't really. The point is,
Yeah.
in almost every debate, that's not necessarily a thing to convince the
Sure.
opponent. It's more so to educate the audience, or maybe even educate
debating
the
is
other
the
opponents.
worst way to try to change the person you're arguing with mind.
Yeah,
it's the worst way.
I felt like it was pretty constructive, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it didn't devolve into chaos, which is cool. A lot of those have.
My feelings are hurt, so I'm going to resort to ad hominems for the rest of the session.
Yeah, there was no ad hominem, so that makes me happy.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Oh, somebody said I'm confused on the free will stuff.
Fair.
Grady Finch says he's confused on the free will stuff. Do you want to elaborate on that, guys? Either one of you. It's open.
Well, technically, that's not exactly a question. I mean, it is a statement. I'm not trying to demean.
I get. Maybe
person,
they're
but-
asking what is free will. All right.
Right. I guess we'll come to an idea of what is free will. Free will is the position that you are in control, or that someone or something can be in control of the choices they make. They have ultimate power over the choices they have.
I would more define free will as within one's own capability to make an action or choice, one has the ability to do so as the final actor.
Yeah.
Again, somebody asks me to cause the sun to implode, I'm gonna have to refuse, not because I can do that, or not
Well, you
because
can
I don't have the
certainly
will.
try. You have the free will to try, right?
I agree. Yeah. I have the will to try, but I can't do that.
Okay. Oh. Someone said, so why wouldn't you? Is that why wouldn't you try?
Why wouldn't I? What was this? Was this like just now?
Yeah, just now. Sorry.
Oh,
mean,
okay.
I
Just
tried
wanted-
to
Why
blow up
wouldn't
the
you
sun
have
at
free
6 years
will?
old,
Why
it didn't
wouldn't
work.
Why wouldn't you have free will? That is the
Oh.
question.
Oh, okay. I think I'll take that one if I may.
Go ahead.
Why wouldn't you have free will? the most compelling argument to as why we don't have free will is because we live in a universe where of cause and effect, and every instant moment before this has a preceding incident or cause. We wake up in the morning because we slept. Uh, we slept because we were tired. We make choices that are probably influenced by those factors, by all the little, everything down to the subatomic level that influences and constructs the reality we live in is a series of cause and effect. So whenever you look at a choice someone makes, you can always go back pretty much ad infinitum to preceding events that had some place in that up to that moment. And so therefore, the claim can be made that free will may be actually an illusion and that everything is just the product of cause and effect. It's called physical determinism. If you're ever curious about the subject.
Okay, and we have another question. Go ahead.
oh.
Go ahead. You go ahead. No, go ahead.
I would also agree for the most part is that if human beings would not have free will, then one could argue that it is because human brains, the way our brains function when it comes to all actions, not just some, but every single action that a human being does, is based on the brain sending a signal to it, and that brain's functions are determined purely by chemicals that will intake
right.
versus outtake.
Right, and they're affected by stimulus, biology, etc., but they're affected at a physical level.
Okay, and then we have another one that is, it says, Jordan, do you believe in a priori moral knowledge or only a post priori? And then if there is absolute scientific truth, which humans derived through specific scientific method, then why not absolute morality?
So what I'm not going to say absolute morality can't exist. My position is the most reasonable claim is to remain agnostic on the subject and default to the claim that requires the least amount of evidence to support it, i.e. a naturalistic explanation. As far as a priori knowledge goes, I think if you go into the extreme philosophical sense, we are ultimately limited into what we can observe and interpret and understand, or even be cognitively aware of. People can have brain injuries where they can't perceive left. I know that sounds crazy, but there are people who cannot perceive of the concept left after experiencing a brain injury. The leftness of the universe from a physical and conceptual level is just not aware to them. So we are limited by those constraints. So we can't, and on that basis of that we're limited to the tools we develop, the instruments we develop scientifically and our senses, there will always be realms of information that we cannot be aware of. And so there's always the possibility that there is information out there that can contradict what we know, et cetera. But in the absence of that information, you have to rely on what you do know and what you can most reasonably infer that requires the least amount of guesswork to derive. That kind of an Occam's razor, but with some more nuance to it. That is why you can and because of that, we have physical constants. We see with tools physical principles in play that are universal across different cultures that discover things and they build off of that. The same has not been demonstrated in the realm of morality. There has been no sensory or representation that seems to consistently dictate any moral knowledge, any moral truth that is universal. What we have is a metric of success and failure in the order of nature, but I would say that's probably arbitrary. That's an arbitrary metric that we've imposed to measure success. There's no universal claim to this.
I know there was a couple follow-ups throughout. They said that the same person said that can be determined through a human method, ? And then he said, or do you have so little faith in human ingenuity, LOL.
Wait, who's that for?
It's for you, Jordan.
Oh, wait, repeat the question.
So it's a addition from the first question, right? When it was right after the question, they said that can be determined through a human method, ? Or do you have so little faith in human ingenuity?
It's not a matter of trying to break down that question. Ingenuity in the philosophical sense. I need some clarification.
They said there may be the same person, Physegypton. There may be information we haven't yet accessed, but we have the fundamental framework to, in theory, access it. Same is true for science.
The same is true for science. That's where I have to disagree. We have philosophical groundworks to derive moral principles through logic, most of which tend to be relative. But once again, with science, what you're doing is you're determining falsifiability. You're basically trying to disprove a claim to such an extent where you're left with the most robust and sturdy explanation that stands up to the most scrutiny. We haven't seen the same thing in the realm of moral philosophy. There's been a wide range of different philosophies, from utilitarianism to more tautological. That's the right word, whatever. We're seeing way too much of a stratification in moral principles and values and beliefs to indicate those universal principles that are as resolute as physics. Once again, it's evidence indicates a incredible degree of subjectivity through time and geography and cultural differences. You do not get the same with the scientific method applying to real mechanics, physics, or biology. This becomes a philosophical study in which you derive the truths through logic and reason. Yeah, you can infer a certain degree of that, but it still ends up with the issue of falsifiability. It's not something that is testable. And when you can't test something, you have to go with the simplest explanation.
All right. And they said, does that mean that we have to compare everything to the same scrutiny?
I think if you want to form your opinions and beliefs and that is something you value, you should apply scrutiny really to everything. There's nothing wrong with scrutinizing a philosophy, but still choosing to accept it in practice. Especially if it leads to a quality of life that you prefer, if it leads to a world you'd prefer to live in, and it's generally agreeable with everybody else to be a pretty productive world. I think we've evolved. We've certainly evolved, I think, to have more knowledge and empathy with one another, to understand, to build a more robust, fair moral structure. I probably deviated a bunch. Did I answer that question?
So we have another one. This is for both of you. It
Yeah.
said, why should moral principles not be held to the same or equal scrutiny that a scientific hypothesis would be?
I guess I could. So how about, I guess maybe I could go first, give Jordan a little bit of a break. So repeat the question. I want to make sure I understand that, though.
Yeah. Why should moral principles not be held to the same equal scrutiny that a scientific hypothesis would be?
Not be held. Well, I mean, does this really apply to me? Because I think they should.
It says it's for both.
Yeah,
of
I
you.
think they.
It is for both.
I have to say, I think they absolutely should be held to the same scrutiny.
Yeah, I think both of us would at least agree with that any moral hypothesis should be held to the exact same scrutiny as a scientific hypothesis or a theory.
Really, I would go so far to say anytime you're trying to claim an affirmative that something is true, it should be held to the same scrutiny.
Yes, and I would completely agree with that when it comes to the overall idea of burden of proof. Someone who makes an affirmative statement must provide evidence to support of that. Yeah.
Okay.
No counter arguments from me.
They just said, "Oh, okay, good. Just making sure." You're getting a little test from the chat today.
I think maybe that's also just people's instinct in general when given a question. Some people just want to argue on the contrary. Maybe I don't know. That could be.
Yeah, people just want to see your insights.
That's kind of why we're here.
Questions. Giggle.
Okay. I'll leave it up for a couple more minutes for any questions. Anything you guys want to elaborate on?
I think the last elaboration that we would do would probably just be just closing statements
Are
or
you
a
still
wrap up.
okay? You guys are.
Yeah, and
You
I'm
still
just
want to do
saying,
that?
like, I
Okay.
don't really think that we can add too
Sure.
much else.
Yeah.
I feel like my case is rested.
Okay.
I feel like my case is rested pretty well, but I'll still clarify just to wrap things.
Okay. Yeah. All right. All right. Well, then hear this. We're gonna end closing statement, or sorry, not closing statements. The Q&A. Thanks for everybody who asked questions. That's awesome. And then yeah, so let's jump into closing statements, and you guys are going to be allotted, I believe, 10 minutes each.
Yeah.
Yep. 10
No
minutes.
more than.
All right.
Yeah.
And then Jordan, go first.
Okay. So after this discussion, he's made a lot of claims about the natural order being the philosophy, the guiding principle and evidence of an objective code of ethics, essentially. Even without the self-evident free will argument. At the same time, it's really going to be up to you guys to decide whether or not that has hit the burden of proof necessary. I don't believe it has. The fact is not one point seems to indicate that this morality is objectively true. It certainly defends an argument that we should have objective morality, that we should practice it, that it would be good if we had an objective moral philosophy that was consistent. But none of it speaks to the metaphysics, or nothing really seeks to answer the question of it being fundamentally true. We see patterns in nature, we see consistency, but none of that is a value judgment. Those are just observations. There are no value judgments that we have observed the universe making. That our world we live in actively makes outside of our interpretation and measurement of that. Scientific truths, quote unquote truths, or the least falsifiable claims, have had observations inconsistencies. Even when something is turned on its head, it just gets it closer to a truth. It's really just because we've developed a better methodology or technology to get there. The only headway we've made in morality, and this is just in Western culture, is it's like I said before, we have a bit more empathy. We're a bit more educated. And when you lead with empathetic reason, it's a generally good practicing philosophy. None of that has anything to do with that being a reality that the universe has built in to the code that makes it. None of it. And really, at the end of the day, it's going to be up to you guys to decide if that has stood up to scrutiny. It's not about whether it feels right. It's not about whether it's a better philosophy. It's about whether or not that claim is valid enough is a more reliable enough claim than the alternative that requires a lower burden of proof. That doesn't require those two things at all. We know that people behave on a code of ethics. We've observed these. We understand that morality does exist. People practice it. But that's the claim moral relativity requires. And that's all it requires. And that's it. That's my time.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, Wrinkle.
Awesome. Let's go. Well, first, I'd just like to thank everybody for either showing as the host, showing as a participant, or showing as the audience. It's been a fun time. Is morality objective? I say yes. To those who say no, that it is not objective, that these are merely just human opinions, well, much like, again, some people are debating a policy or even just debating various scientific facts and throwing it out there. Should someone come along and say, well, there isn't really a truth, because as you can see, all these people disagree, and it would be better for society to function if everybody believed in a certain way, but there is no inherent but there's no inherent truth to this. If morals are within this category, then why even pretend that it is, why even pretend that it's real? Could it be that it actually works? Again, we don't pretend gravity is real because it just functions that way. We don't pretend various other things, that the earth is round. We assume that it's round and we go through it not because it's easier or because it just works, but because it's true. It works because it's true. And so does morality. And should anybody disagree with that, well, then I would welcome that person to try various things that are, even if still legal, but of course are very questionable when it comes to a moral standard, like lying to friends constantly, committing things like gossip or fraud in some other way, or maybe even adultery or fornication. Anybody who tries these things, while these things are legal, are still immoral behaviors. And immoral behaviors will always lead to destructiveness. These things don't work, these behaviors don't work, or these other behaviors work because, again, these are all based on real principles, not necessarily products of the human mind. And while people who might think that it would be, these things would be good if morality actually did exist, well, fortunately for them, they are good because morality does exist. And the only reason anybody can even say such a proposition of it would be good if we did this, or it would be bad if we did that, again, this is obviously some sort of objective standard to which people can measure. Regardless of individual opinions, whether people disagree or agree, these things have real consequences in the real world. Some things lead to productive, good, ordered. Some things lead to bad, evil, disordered, destructive. And that is, by definition, morality and why it is objective. And we're all done.
Okay. Awesome, guys. Well, thanks for coming and thanks for having a good debate. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Hopefully, we can have you guys come out at some time here in the future because this was really fun. And but yeah, so I just if you guys wanted to let everybody know where they could find you, that would be go ahead at your will.
Well, you can find me on this podcast if we ever do it again. You can find me on Instagram. It's j.tryn, jay.tryn. Now I'm going to have to unprivate the profile and maybe actually build and update the 13-year-old photo that was used for the flyer. So we'll see. That's how you can reach me.
I'm a good influence on you.
Uh, as for me, I'll probably make a Rumble account. Usually the other accounts that I have are for other things that I don't really want to mix it up, whether it's just private communication with friends, stuff I don't really want to have out there. But I will pursue the comments and I'll probably make a Rumble account or what are the other platforms? I'll probably look at the other platforms and I'll make an account on one of them and I'll check the messages in case if anybody wants to reach me or something.
Okay, and yeah, well, just remember, guys, to like, follow, subscribe anywhere that you guys see us. You can find all the links down below in the about sections or the descriptions. And thanks again so much for coming out and hanging out. Hope you guys had a great time, and we'll catch you next time. Bye. Cool, guys.